Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, January 20th, 2022. Time for another show. Time for an invasion of Ukraine. Time for all sorts of things that we are, not all of which we're participating in, of course. Some of which we're trying to prevent, but I don't know. Not actively here on the show. I think it's fair to say I'm not doing enough for our Ukrainian friends to deter Russian aggression, but we're raising awareness. Okay, well, apparently, I just, randomly picked up the note that the British must apparently think that the invasion is more or less imminent, and just noticed a tweet flying by that indicates that might actually be true. The UK, it is reported here. Let me pick up the original so we can tell you who's making the claim. Security and defense editor at Sky News. Sky News, that's Rupert Murdoch. So I don't know. But anyway, Deborah Haynes offers this up. The UK has flown some 2,000 anti-tank weapons to Ukraine on several C-17 flights just this week. And in their British way, they put it this way: the unusually rapid gifting of kit appears to underline how seriously UK views the threat of a new Russian invasion. So just, hey, stay on your toes. If you see any Russians invading in your neighborhood, call us here at the studio and tweet us with the KITM hashtag and let us know what sort of weaponry you're seeing, and we'll leave it up to Republicans in Congress and give them a veto power along with Joe Manchin on whether or not we'll help you out. How's that? Does that sound like a good guarantee of security to you? You ready to go forward and engage in commerce as though nothing were happening? Good. Okay. Well, there's plenty of other news to catch up on, of course, and including this morning's tweet from Bill in Portland, Maine, which helpfully informs us that the Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. Kagro X, something, and an hour two, something as well. And let me also emphasize at this point, only Daisy Cottage Cheese will do. I'm going to be singing that in my head for the next 100 years, apparently. Did it to myself. It's my own fault. Anyway, up late last night, so who knows what's going to happen today as we set about the task of analyzing the day's news with Greg Dworkin and his raft of stories, plus my own fatigued ramblings about things. I was providing some extra help with homework last night, although I don't know how much I helped, but I was certainly obsessing over it, so we definitely have that going for him. If they grade that, he's going to do great. But, just trying to help out with that task and a few others on the private side of life. But it did keep me up a little later than I thought, and also kept me from watching the floor action in the Senate directly. But, of course, we can digest that from here and from news reports and from chit-chat across the internet and on the coming across the transom on Twitter. As I said in the Morning Post, and I stand by this, it may be the only podcast in the world where when some complicated Senate procedure, or House procedure for that matter, goes down and people are watching it and confused as to exactly what happened, and I didn't watch it, if you hum a few bars, I can fake it. We'll read the news and use that to reconstruct what happened and explain everything if that's even necessary. You know what the outcome was. They did have their filibuster showdown, or at least round one of the filibuster showdown. And guess what? It went as expected. All the Democrats said, yes, let's get the filibuster out of the way through one mechanism or another so that we can get to this important voting rights protection legislation. And Manchin and Sinema said, let us not do that. And then they didn't do that. What comes next? Still open for guessing, and but I guess it's still a possibility that they might entertain the possibility of a real knockdown, drag out, talking filibuster, but it doesn't look like it from the schedule. I think they're moving on to some admittedly important things like judicial nominations. I think they have a circuit court nomination before them first up. But after that, I don't know what else they might want to put on their plates besides this. Though they might want to spend some time perhaps reacting to the looming possible crisis in Ukraine. The British seem to think that it's something, although maybe they're just trying to distract themselves from Boris Johnson's problems. Greg Dworkin is here as a distraction from my problems, when that's all that really matters to me. It's just me and you on the radio at the moment, so we can do whatever we want. So, Greg, good morning. How you doing?
Good morning. We're doing just fine.
Good. I am glad to hear that. That is good news. All right. That's
could
it.
Be worse.
Yeah, all right. Good. I think that probably sums it up. Well, the news could save a lot of time on TV if they just got to it this way, I think. Abby also doing
We're just waiting for the plow to go by.
Oh, okay. So snow on the ground. We had school canceled for a little rain that actually stopped. So,
that's good. Yeah, we have an icy mix, so we have a 2-hour delay. It's interesting that Putin is actually pissed off all the nice people. So Britain wants to send arms. Canada is looking at options over Ukraine's request for weapons and equipment. If the world is arming Ukraine, and they've even gotten the polite Canadians to think about it, basically Biden is trying to make the point that, he thinks Putin is still trying to recreate the empire, but there'll be a price for it.
Okay.
And I don't know if this is wise or not wise, but this appears to be the move here.
Yes. Well, I don't know. I don't know whose perspective we're trying to speak from about what's wise, but certainly, I mean, it's been signaling it for ages. And
well, the Ukraine government, Ukraine as a country, without the is requesting aid.
Okay. Do we need them to investigate anybody in the Trump family or anything? Should we ask for that?
I don't know. Germany's saying that they'll consider dumping their pipeline, even though Western Europe is economically tied to Russia through their energy sources.
Right, true. Yes,
so, it's complicated. And, Putin isn't in complete and total control of Russia. The oligarchs are. And so the question is, do you make the price high enough so that the people behind Putin say, okay, you made your point, this isn't a great idea.
Yeah, right. He's killing people like it's free, they'll say, eventually, because it's a
this is going to cost us, so we don't like it. So don't kill too many people.
Yeah, all right. Well, that's a good way of thinking of it.
The other problem is, of course, these are, as far as those little green army men go, these are pretty good armies. So a lot of people get killed because they're really good at it.
I guess congratulations.
Right, so, just something worthwhile in terms of keeping an eye on that. So that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, well-trained, well-armed. I think the new trend is towards lower numbers of casualties and smaller engagements, but it'll be
not
disruptive.
this. I mean, they're really good at being lethal. And so if it's a full-scale conflict between the Ukrainian army, which is armed by the West, and the Russians, who are pretty good at this too. I mean, there's going to be a lot of people that get killed.
It could be. They could opt for the old school thing with tanks. They could opt for the new Russian methodology of guys in tracksuits doing small scale murdering.
Small scale missiles.
Yeah, right. Local stuff.
Right. Anyway, so that's the thing to watch at that end. At this end, I didn't watch the Senate proceedings either. I just watched Reverend Warnock's speech, Senator Reverend Warnock.
Excellent choice, sir.
He's probably the best speaker and made the best point. You don't get to use Martin Luther King's name and then steal his identity.
Yes, well,
and so is it Jim
that.
Crow? Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happened? I guess it was a 49-51 vote. It was 50-50 basically to go ahead and let's pass this thing, which of course doesn't break the filibuster, which is the point. But in a move that always needs to be explained, Chuck Schumer changed his yes to no so he could bring it up at some later time because the Senate has arcane rules.
Right, yes. If you're on the winning side of something, you can ask later to reconsider it. I was only on the winning side so that I could do this.
Right.
They do that. Okay.
So because it was vitally important, but also expected
yes,
that this would be the outcome, you could argue that actually the biggest news that came yesterday is from the Supreme Court.
Okay, I'll argue that.
You
argue that.
You argued before the court that what happened is the Supreme Court rebuked Trump in a bizarre way. The Supreme Court will, in the end, allow release of January 6 files by National Archives. That's really the bottom line, and that's what's important.
Okay, good.
However, they didn't just say that.
They love saying things. This is their job.
Because there's a Supreme Court, instead of having like a 9-0 to make the point, Clarence Thomas, the worst judge, basically said, okay, I get your point here, but you're talking about my wife, so no.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah, we'll be getting a lot of documents that mention her.
I mean, I could have recused myself, but no way.
Right. I
didn't work this hard to get here to recuse myself on stuff that I really care about.
To be fair, I wouldn't want to go home and not voting to help her out either, I guess.
Right.
But then don't marry her. There you go.
Exactly.
Done.
So there's that.
All right.
And what the Supreme Court did is basically, as far as I can figure, again, I'm not a lawyer, so my explanations of what the court did are subject to like somebody who knows what they're talking about.
We'll get
But what they apparently did is said, okay, you can have all the records you asked for, but this doesn't set a precedent.
They do like that little move. Okay.
We don't want you to think that we're actually ruling on the merits here, because we're not. What we're basically saying is, the lower courts already ruled, so we're not really going to change anything, except that we're going to lecture them about their wording on how they came to their brilliant decision that is so good that we just can't really figure out a way to overrule it. And so we'll just say, okay, fine, but, all this stuff about former presidents and current presidents, strike that out. Don't pay any attention to that. And this isn't the precedent. And Kavanaugh made it a little bit clearer what was going on here, because he had a concurrence, I guess.
Yeah.
Where he said, look, here's the deal. Trump says that he has privilege. Biden, the current president, says he doesn't. Let's be clear here. The current president doesn't get to decide in all cases that the former president doesn't have privilege.
Oh.
So there may be a situation, maybe the next time Trump stuff comes up, maybe it'll be the inauguration, maybe it'll be the Ukraine call. Something will come up where I get to say, we didn't decide on the merits that Trump has no say in this.
I see.
He gets to come back for another bite at the apple on some other issue that's important, because we'll reserve the right to say, okay, well, maybe in this particular case, he gets to shield what's going on. And that's why it was such a bizarre ruling. It wasn't just that, okay, you can have the papers, which is the important part of it. It's that we're keeping an eye out on future things, because this guy did so many things, guaranteed something else is going to come before us involving him, and we reserve the right to protect him.
Well, I wonder if anybody joined in his concurrence or if he wrote alone, but you might also see the same sort of caution expressed possibly by more liberal jurists, as they say when they're talking about fancy people. I know that there were a lot of people concerned about the idea of, there might one day be, or the idea rather, that it would be used against, say, a post-Biden, in a post-Biden administration.
I mean, you could make up a case easily where the current president wants to get the former president on political grounds, and therefore just goes after him. The thing is, they didn't have to do any of that. They could have just said, no, you don't get a stay, period.
Yeah, they could have done that, and then should another case come up, say, oh, this case is different from the other one. And
we didn't say anything about the other one. This is different. Let's do this one on the merits.
All right. Well,
but they didn't do that. They decided they wanted to write about it in a way that really doesn't clarify anything.
Well, that's. I'm glad they got around to doing it 8-1.
Other than Thomas wants to protect his wife.
Yeah. Right. So they said, all right, you can do that. Like counting votes in the Senate. We don't need you to break a tie or anything. So you can go do the one that you need to save face at home, literally at home.
Yeah.
And we'll all do the other thing. And I wonder whether they made any bargaining. If we're going to write this gibberish that doesn't apply to anything, we all have to be on it. And, all right, fine, sure, we'll all go ahead with it. When it comes out to the substantive result we want, if you're looking for backup on this, I guess I can sign on to something that says it's not precedent, even though they said that about Bush v. Gore and everybody used it. But, okay.
So, here's how the Times covers this. In an unsigned order, the majority wrote that Mr. Trump's request for a stay, while the case moved forward, presented weighty issues.
It always does.
It always does. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been in front of the Supreme Court.
That is
true.
It
wouldn't have taken the case, including whether and in what circumstances a former president may obtain a court order preventing disclosure of privileged records from his tenure in office in the face of a determination by the incumbent to waive that privilege. But the appeals court ruling against Mr. Trump didn't turn on those questions. Apparently, as much as I could figure it out, the Court of Appeals basically said under any circumstances you have to turn this stuff over.
Oh. Well,
and so the Supreme Court said, well, the issue, although it appears to be a weighty issue of whether the current president can deal with the former president, the fact of the matter is, in this case, you have no grounds to stand on.
Hey, no stand.
So we don't even have to rule on the merits.
Okay.
It's just a stupid request, which Clarence Thomas agreed with.
I'm not saying it's me, it's my wife.
And so here's the best part. Within hours of the decision, the National Archives turned over hundreds of pages of documents to the committee.
They were ready.
Cheney and Benny Thompson, the chair, called the decision a victory for the rule of law and American democracy.
Yay for the rule of law.
And everybody was volunteering to be the person who hit the send button. I'll be there. I'll do it. I really want to be the person to hit the send button as soon as Supreme Court says you can.
Cool. Well, that sounds like a fun day at the office.
Right. So among the documents that Mr. Trump had asserted executive privilege were proposed talking points for Kayleigh McEnany, his former press secretary, a handwritten note concerning January 6th, a draft text of a presidential speech for the Save America rally that preceded the mob attack, and a draft executive order on the topic of election integrity.
Well, those are all interesting. I'm a little confused about what they thought was so privileged about talking points for Kayleigh McEnany.
Right. He also sought to block the release of records from the files of Mark Meadows, Stephen Miller, Patrick Philbin, his former deputy counsel. He also sought to stop the release of the White House Daily Diary, a record of the president's movements, phone calls, trips, briefings, meetings, and activities, as well as logs showing phone calls to the president and vice president Mike Pence concerning January 6th.
Yes.
And finally, Mr. Trump tried to keep secret a draft proclamation honoring the Capitol Police and 2 officers who died after the riot, a memo about a potential lawsuit against several states that Biden won,
okay, that's better.
An email chain from a state official regarding election-related issues, and talking points on supposed election irregularities in one county in Michigan.
Yeah, well, not great claims on some of that stuff. Some of it would be better. I could see where it's closer to the line. But, yeah, talking points for my press secretary to tell everyone that she did tell everyone, I don't know. And then, of course, just records of what happened at the White House. Like, why do we mandate those records be kept if no one can ever see those records?
Right.
Okay.
So Brett Kavanaugh, who served as staff secretary to President George W. Bush, remember, this guy is a political hack, was the only justice to issue a signed opinion in the case.
Okay.
He said the appeals court, in a passage the majority had said was non-binding, had been wrong in its analysis. Because the president must be able to successfully invoke the presidential communications privilege.
Okay. Well,
including otherwise would eviscerate the executive privilege for presidential communications. And, honestly, again, as you sort of alluded to, he has a point.
Yes.
Let's say it was this discussion that Biden is having now about what to do about Ukraine.
Yes.
The next president could say, well, I want everybody to know what Biden did. And Biden could say, well, that's ridiculous. I had, privileged discussions with our allies.
Yeah.
And that would only embarrass them.
Right. And you want to pry them loose. Maybe the reason is because you think that...
well, you're trying to embarrass them. That's all you're trying to do. You're a fascist.
You think Hunter
and you
Biden
want all our allies to hate us, and that's the only reason you're doing this.
That could be one reason. Yeah, right. Or you could be saying, some reason, I believe Hunter Biden was in on the discussions and I need the records to prove it.
Right. And it also had to do with Hillary Clinton's emails, so you have to do it.
Mm-hmm. And Hugo Chavez as well. So
right.
Why not?
Now, people are acknowledging that writing for the panel, Judge Patricia Millett wrote a terrific opinion, which Kavanaugh said was wrong and everybody else said was brilliant. So that gives you an idea where everything stands. Acknowledged that former presidents do have the right to invoke executive privilege. So Kavanaugh didn't get that part right. But she said the privilege is not absolute, even when it's asserted by a sitting president. For example, the Nixon tapes.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Court unanimously ruled that President Nixon had to comply with a trial subpoena seeking tapes of his conversation in the Oval Office, rejecting his claims of executive privileges. While he was president, it was 9-0, and that's why, although expected, Clarence Thomas's dissent was so disappointing. You really wanted a 9-0 decision here.
Dissent. Yeah, that would have been nice, but he always gets an asterisk on his opinions anyway. So
yeah, well, in his opinion on Wednesday, Justice Kavanaugh said there were important lessons in the court's analysis in the Nixon case. Mm-hmm. Right? 9-0 really makes the country think he did something wrong, so we better find somebody to dissent. Kavanaugh thought but didn't write.
No, well, 8-1 won't do it. But, it's expected, as you said. I don't know. I'll have to give some time to it. Maybe I can read through it. I'm curious about the idea of Kavanaugh saying, well, I write separately to point out that Judge Millett was wrong, and then proceeds, it sounds like, say that actually she was kind of right. And I don't know why. But okay, I'm not certain why he thinks that that's wrong. It sounds like she stated more or less the same thing that he did. But maybe on closer inspection, he had a couple of beers and, felt differently about it at the time. I have no idea. Okay, so 8-1 is still pretty powerful, though.
Yeah, and the bottom line is Judge Millett and the panel who said turn over the material wrote that the House committee has a legitimate need for the documents. And essentially the Supreme Court said, we can't really argue that. That's why I'm saying my own opinion is that we're arguing for future consideration. Something else he did, we're still in the position of trying to protect him.
Okay, well, not worst
terrible.
Thing. Yeah, all right. So,
but it's just it's weird.
Yeah,
they didn't just say, look, you have to turn it over. Period.
Yeah,
that's what I was looking for. We didn't get that.
But pretty close to it. I mean,
close to it. I mean, the bottom line is they have to turn it over.
And no controversy. And they did it fast too. So everything's mute, as Trump likes to say, as opposed to moot. Now.
Bigly.
And,
it's bigly mute.
Yeah, that's right. All the papers are in
the other thing is I don't know how much they're actually getting. They said they got 400 documents. I don't know if there's 75,000 boxes that are still waiting to be shipped.
That's true. I don't know how long the documents are. I don't know how much of it is written in crayon or Sharpie for them.
Sharpie, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. We'll see what the committee wants next.
Yeah, and that's not even the end of it, because there's more stuff. Here's a New York Times story: how Oath Keepers are accused of plotting to storm the Capitol. Marcy Wheeler's laid out a lot of this in detail, and better than just about any of the other papers. But here's a convenient one: how Oath Keepers are accused of plotting to storm the Capitol in laying out the sedition charge against Stuart Rhodes, the founder and leader of the far-right Oath Keeper militia.
Yeah.
And 10 others.
That's how they did it.
Because, you can't plot if you're just doing it. You can't conspire if you're just doing it yourself. You got to have others.
That's right.
Federal prosecutors have built a timeline of events as evidence of a conspiracy to storm the Capitol last year. And they include the Oath Keepers, but there's also Proud Boys and a whole bunch of other people. They're starting to get roped in. CBS has a piece here. House January 6th committee subpoenas Rudy Giuliani and other Trump allies.
Are you sure? Okay.
Well, I'm sure they subpoenaed him. House Select Committee investigating the January 6th assault on Tuesday issued subpoenas to former Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani. It's probably the guy who serves the subpoena probably had to go to that Four Seasons landscaping place to find him. And 3 others who challenged the 2020 election results: Jenna Ellis, Sidney Powell, and Boris Epstein, former Trump White House aide.
Wow. All right. Blast from the past. I mean, he was
the 4 individuals we've subpoenaed today advanced unsupported theories about election fraud, pushed efforts to overturn the election results, or were in direct contact with the former president, about attempts to stop the counting of electoral votes. So clearly, I don't know what they'll wind up with the work product, but what they're looking at isn't just what happened on January 6th, it's what happened before January 6th, what the setup was, who was planting the theoretical reasons for why then Kayleigh McEnany's talking points would suggest that there was some reason to challenge January 6th and then January 6th, and then the violence about January 6th, which was planned in accordance with the theoretical underpinnings.
Yes.
And that's why John Eastman and all this other pre-January 6th material is so relevant, as well as what happened at the Willard Hotel, not just how the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys and everybody else decided that they knew about what was going on with the tunnels and they knew the layout, and they were there in force.
Right. So
dressed appropriately,
well,
being
appropriate
attacks
for
on
an
specific
attack,
places like windows, all that sort of stuff. So,
Right.
How they tie it together, that's their job.
Yes, okay. Well, that will be their job, and see how they lay it out in the next couple of days. But yeah, all the plotting is important. I suppose it's possible that some of the documents that they were seeking in the court case, I was pondering why they would even think there was privilege for talking points for Kayleigh McEnany. I suppose they could be talking points that she ended up deciding, or someone decided not to have her deliver them because they were perhaps too incriminating, and so they're written, but they were never used, and I would like to have them, and they thought, oh, well, this is sort of a deliberative privilege thing. We talked about doing it, and we have to have, open consultation about what to say, but then we decided not to say it, so it shouldn't be disclosed. But that would be interesting if the talking points was, we're about to do a crime, everybody watch. You'd want that paper. All right.
Yeah, how we explain the crime.
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Edwards Radio. Briefly forgetting what show we were doing here. Okay, we're here. We're back. I haven't forgotten. But yes, where were we going with this? Oh, right.
Well, that's because the conversation was just so interesting. You kind of forget where you are and who you're talking to.
We had the rest of it during the break, and then I said, now what?
So CNN has also
CNN.
apparently not only asked for but obtained phone numbers associated with Eric Trump and Kimberly Guilfoyle. And so, I mean, it's a pretty wide-ranging net they're casting, and they're getting a lot of information. And the idea that, well, why would you subpoena Rudy Giuliani? It's all performative. He'll fight it in court, and, by the time this is all settled 7 months from now, or a year and 7 months from now, the committee's already done. The fact is, they're getting a lot of material.
Good. That's nice. Yeah, I don't have many questions about why subpoena.
Right. And not only that, because
Giuliani.
You're doing the presenting, let's say, just theoretically here,
yes,
this is a hypothetical. Let's say, well, we got information here from Rudy Giuliani's phone, which everybody looked at and said, yeah, this isn't privileged, that he was plotting stuff, and he did this, and he did that, and he did it at the Willard, and he did it with these other people, and he got paid for it, and we subpoenaed him in order to address these, and he refused.
Yeah, okay.
Let's move on to something else then.
Yeah. I mean, you could. I mean, for the time being, especially if you are planning on making any kind of criminal referrals, and you could say, there may be a point at which the committee wants to stop trying to force the testimony, and they prefer to have the Department of Justice do it. but I don't know where that is. But certainly, it looks like you're doing your work if you're subpoenaing people in, in strata like this and working your way up. Yeah,
Right.
even if you're not, actually.
Yeah.
Or
Just
if
the
you're
fact that
being
it resembles a
prevented from
mob
doing
case, that's just the way it goes.
Yeah, just an
So
unfortunate
take all of this.
circumstance.
Take all of what's happening with the Supreme Court, what Trump can and can't do, and the wide net that's cast, and what we already know about what's going on at state level and how important that is. Dan Frumkin has a piece here. Where are the interviews with regular Americans terrified for our democracy? And we talked the other day about like people in Maine saying, democracy on the line. I don't know. Sounds like a lot of hyperbole. I don't know that much about it. I trust Susan Collins. And what about everybody else? Sure, you interviewed those people. But what about the people that really are worried about what's going on with fascism and democracy and right-wing militant Christian nationalism and so on and so forth? So Dan Frumkin writes, I'm terrified, and I know I'm not the only one. I'm terrified by the increasingly real possibility that this country, if Republicans take Congress in 2022 and Trump prevails in 2024, that's a big assumption that he's still around and he's still running. Yeah, I know he wants to, but a lot of things can happen between now and then. Could become a white Christian authoritarian state where constitutional rights and protections get rolled back either by law, by fiat, or at the point of a neo-brown shirt's gun. So he's worried about that. The thing about Trump running in 2024 is that he and DeSantis are going to fight over the party, and DeSantis may well win. The reason that Trump was popular is because he was saying things that other people thought and wanted to say themselves. And the reason that was so disappointing that he won in 2016 and got so many votes in 2020 is that there are a lot of people who think just the way he does.
Yes.
And because there's a lot of people that think the way he does, he's not the only one that can articulate it. And that's where DeSantis come in. Everybody said, well, what happens if a smarter Trump comes along? Well, DeSantis also says what everybody who voted for Trump was thinking. And it's not automatic that in a DeSantis-Trump showdown, Trump wins. Trump may be looked at as damaged goods or somebody who tried and failed. And so it's not so clear that Trump wins that. And, of course, I'm fine with, Republicans in disarray and them, if they want a civil war, let it be among the Republicans, fine. But it's not automatic to me that Trump prevails in 2024. I'm not even sure he's a nominee.
I mean, they are fighting as it stands now. And usually when there's a difference of opinion that erupts into a fight, the pattern up to now, although for most of that time Trump was president, and I guess it was considered a normal thing for the other person to back down because Trump was the head of the party and the president, allegedly, of the United States. Now that that's not the case, I guess there's more room for fighting. But DeSantis, he has been more or less standing his ground on this stuff, dumb as the ground may be.
Yeah, same as Greg Abbott. I mean, there's other people with political skills who could run in that slot. That's what I'm saying. Dan Frumkin properly says, this is a concern. He says, and not alone. A Quinnipiac poll out this week found that a significant majority of Americans, 58 to 37, believe the nation's democracy is in danger of collapse.
Oh.
Some of that's right-wingers, but it's 56 to 37 among Democrats.
Yeah.
And over half of Americans also consider it very likely or somewhat likely that there'll be another attack in the U.S. like the one at the U.S. Capitol.
Yeah, sure.
But I don't read about people who feel that way in the news.
They're not in diners.
That's right. It's all highly reminiscent of what happened to a near boycott of Biden supporter coverage before the 2020 election. Jamel Bowie wrote in July 2019 that anti-Trump voters are practically invisible. Even though they represented the majority of Americans, it didn't get any better in the ensuing 16 months. It's been true during every run-up to war in our history. The supposed left gets ignored. It's true again. Where are the voices of the ordinary people who fear for democracy? Why has the majority been silenced? And we still get all these breathless reports in the Trump rally. That part's really well covered. We know what's going on there because the reporters are doing a great job of covering it. What they're not covering is like ordinary people who really don't like Trump and don't want him back but want to get along with their lives. So he's made that point. Jay Rosen has made that point. Others have made that point that really the press needs to step up and start covering not Democrats but democracy, and they do a terrible job. Just look at Chuck Todd on any given Sunday.
Oof. Try not to.
Try not to.
Where do we gather that they can interview us in the wild like they do with diners?
So
farmers markets. I got no idea.
A sort of semi-related piece here by Timothy Noah in New Republic. The only place Biden's floundering is in a sea of journalism cliches, because there's only 5 headlines about presidencies, and this one is number 3.
Okay. Well, if you're going to flounder,
here are the 5 headlines. Remember, this is number 3. Okay, for your quiz later, the answer is number 3.
All right. Is
5
it 3?
headlines.
Oh, yeah.
Candidate wins mandate. Beloved cliche, objectively false, but always has it.
Okay.
Right? Biden won 51% of the vote to 46. Wasn't, that Trump got in 2016. Trump's 46 wasn't even a plurality. Mm-hmm. So Biden's election was more of a mandate than Trump's, but that's not how it's written.
Okay.
Headline number 2, new president faces headwinds.
Sure.
The problem with this cliche is not that it's never true. It's always true.
Right. The honeymoon is over headline.
Right? It's true for everybody.
Yeah.
Any policy worth its salt is always going to face resistance. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, here's the third one.
I don't know.
Amateur night at the White House.
Oh.
That's my favorite White House coverage cliche because it so perfectly combines fury with a complete lack of specificity.
Okay.
Right? It's very early days seeing this precise phrase used against Biden, so perhaps I'm jumping the gun and situating Biden at this stage. Okay. Lexi McAnaman of Teen Vogue referred January 14th to public officials who are acting like it's amateur night at the Apollo. But the amateur night spirit is alive and well in the press's Biden coverage because, like everybody knows, he hasn't done a good job because everybody knows.
This is known.
The economy's pretty good shape, but, everybody knows he's terrible in the economy because everybody knows it.
Sure.
Right? So headline number 4 is administration in disarray. Well, we know that.
Oh, yeah. Everything's
in disarray. That's a given.
Sure. That shouldn't even be in there. Let's make it 4.
And then number 5, his presidency is over.
Oh, okay. Yeah, right. Oh, what happened? There used to be another one.
Right? It's never too early to begin the death watch for a presidency, my friend Jack Schaefer, media columnist at Politico, advises me. Because you're always rewarded.
Yeah, sure. What about, there used to be another one in there, this is the day he truly became president.
That was
what
only
happened
for
to that
Trump.
one? Oh, damn it. All right.
It was only for Trump, and that was Dana Bash, and that was every damn day.
Yeah, well, I thought
in fact, when I pointed
they would
it
find
out,
that so useful.
Blocked me.
Oh. Well, yeah.
That was the day that you finally blocked me.
you finally.
I finally said something to you about it, and you finally blocked me. That's what happened.
Okay. Well, that seems weird, and I guess you should be tagged with that forever.
Right. So, again, all of that is background for what I think, although this is a very long essay, we're not going to spend 20 minutes on it, I don't think. It's just fascinating. It's by a fellow named John Gans, who has a newsletter on Substack called Unpopular Front. This is free to read.
Is it popular?
What is Trumpism? Once more into the breach. Every few months, it seems like there's another round of the interminable fascism debate about Trump. Is it meaningful to label Trump, his movement, the GOP, or at least a significant faction of the GOP, as fascist? Well,
sure,
to call it a debate is perhaps a bit of a stretch, he says. Not a lot of engagement with substantive arguments. But because it comes up, he's going to write a whole long essay about it, which he did. And I think he makes some really interesting points here that are worth considering in terms of what's going on here. He writes, midway down the article, which is going to take about 6 weeks to read.
Oh.
I want to propose that America, in the aftermath of financial crisis and the disastrous adventure in Iraq, was and remains in the sort of crisis of authority, to use Gramsci's phrase, or the dual crises that Jeff Ely speaks of in a crisis of cohesion and a crisis of legitimacy or consent.
Oh, my.
This crisis that the content is a crisis of the ruling class's hegemony, which occurs either because the ruling class has failed in some major political undertaking for which it's requested or forcibly extracted the consent of the broad masses, like war. Sure. Which is a really fancy way of saying, a lot of our problems go back to the war in Iraq. We're still paying the price of a terrible war for the wrong reasons that everybody was lied to about.
Yes.
But
who cares?
the Republicans never really, paid the price for that.
No.
It's just what
That's what he
happened
was
is
saying?
that everybody lost faith in government, and so when the Democrats took over, everybody lost faith in government, and so they applied it to the Democrats.
Oh. Well,
Which is a problem. Because when you run on, the government is the problem, then the next government comes in and you're really unhappy with the last government, you're going to say, okay, well, the government's the problem.
I guess you will.
Or because huge masses, especially peasants and petit bourgeois intellectuals, have passed suddenly from a state of political passivity to a certain activity. So this is all a theory here, but the point he makes is the country remains in constant situation, political immobilism, and deadlock. The political leadership of both parties seems increasingly unable to deal with basic issues facing society. Right. The Republicans can't deal with anything, and the Democrats, as we saw last night, can't deal with voting rights. Mm-hmm. I'm adding these pieces for context. So it's in this context the charismatic figure of Trump enters the GOP primary as an interloper, not a lifelong member of the party's general staff, but he presents himself as leading a national restoration and goes directly after racial and ethnic minorities. He rolled over the leadership of the party's attempt to fight him off because the party leadership had lost the grasp of the base. I mean, the GOP takes Iraq, sends them all off to war, terribly disappointing because they promised it was all about 9/11 and it wasn't. Mm-hmm. So the GOP base is upset with the GOP leadership. Trump comes along and says, well, I'm going to say what you really thought all along. Don't support them, support me. And the GOP base says, yeah, we'll do that.
Interesting.
So we forget, he writes, the extreme heights of rhetoric Republicans use to try to denounce Trump. In the process, Trump and his supporters put incredible pressure on the old leadership and middle ranks of the Republican Party. Sometimes this included actual threats, like in the case of David French, where alt-right trolls were harassing his family. And that brings me to the next point he writes. As soon as Trump appeared as a viable political force, the entire mob of the American extreme right, small and disparate as they were, flocked to him. And they tried to act as his shock troops or commandos. You can see where I'm going with this in terms of how it relates to January 6th.
Yes.
When and where they could, Trump may not be purely fascist in the classical sense, but his style and practice of politics is close enough to excite and mobilize this section of the political fringe. So, again, stepping back from the essay, is Trump a fascist? Well, the fascists think he is.
That's always been true. Yeah, I don't understand the hesitation, really. I think he's made a pretty good case that he is one, but I guess it's more fashionable to say either that, well, maybe he's not, but it doesn't matter, or close enough. I don't know why that's so
well, popular, because if he's a fascist, you have to take sides.
Oh. Well, yeah.
And so the media goes out of their way
him, you're an
to
anti-fascist.
not think that way because they really don't want to be forced to take sides.
Nah, they would have to.
But as I say, your side is
Antifa.
democracy, not Republicans or Democrats. This has not always worked in Trump's favor, he writes, but it's not a constituency he's ever been eager to jettison. For instance, he was very careful in his wording around Charlottesville and about the Proud Boys during the debates, and also pretty gentle about January 6th rioters, even when asking them to go home.
Right.
Trump clearly views this type of group as important to him politically, and he often speaks to them in menacing terms. He attempted to mobilize this contingent during the January 6th crisis. The tactical results of that in the immediate term war of maneuver were a total failure, but longer-term strategic significance is yet to be seen, and now his alliance with such groups may be a political misjudgment, but this proximity should inform the way we think about his politics. Again, to me, that's why the January 6th committee tying in Proud Boys and Oath Keepers into the conspiracy is so important.
Yes.
Because it clearly paints him as the what's the proper term? He's fascist. He's next to fascist.
Oh, okay. Fascist adjacent.
Fascist. That's
what you're trying to think of.
He's fascist adjacent. Right?
All right.
It's true that these groups are disparate, small, struggling with police intervention, prosecution, internal squabbles, but they nonetheless exist. Just follow J.J. McNabb or Dave Newert or any of the folks who actually follow this. Ben Collins for MSNBC. And they have some political valence, even if it's negative. right? So
yes,
it's
throw a
less
little
terror
chemistry
than the
at us.
electoral reality of Trump's popularity within the GOP that eventually cemented the Republican leadership getting in line behind him. He didn't scare them. They weren't afraid of him. They were afraid of his base, not physically, but they were afraid they wouldn't get those votes.
And
That's
maybe
why they
physically.
support him right even now. They're just afraid of losing.
Yes.
It's true, he writes,
They
that they
never won.
occasionally defy him and his followers, but such decisions are politically fraught and require care. Often the Republican leadership makes little tentative steps to come out from behind Trump's shadow only to find he still has too much power to openly defy. I said at the beginning of Trump's presidency that Trump was a constituency without a program for a program without a constituency. Fascism.
Okay.
The Ryan-era GOP program of cutting entitlements had no constituency. Right?
True,
Nobody
probably,
talks
yeah.
about Paul Ryan as being anything anymore.
That's true. And good news at that. But okay, I see why.
Right? So in two different elections, Trump solved problems for the GOP's electoral prospects that seemed to have contradictory solutions. He needed to spike the white vote with appeals to reactionary nostalgia and chauvinism, but he also needed to reach out to Hispanic voters. So in raw numbers of votes, he delivered more than any Republican in history, and he's still by far the most popular politician within the GOP, but he's also broadly unpopular because of his outrageous antics and rhetoric. But since that's what makes him popular within their constituency, they can't do without him. In any case, Republicans were either impressed or cowed enough to not try to purge him, even when they had good opportunities to do so, like the second impeachment. So I want to argue in part
first one.
what puts Trump in meaningful relationship with fascism adjacent as you describe it, is this relationship to the traditional conservative elite. It's a weakening, brittle coalition whose vision for the country was no longer attracting interest. Then Trump arrives as both a rival for power and a kind of strategic reserve of reactionary energy. The classical fascist movement didn't achieve either electoral dominance nor did they effect revolutionary overthrow. They formed coalitions with existing conservative forces. So Trump and his movement has accomplished hegemony over the Republican Party, and like all of its forms, it involves threats and benefits and doesn't preclude the existence of political contest. I think the institutional GOP would prefer to do without Trump, but they have to make their peace with him out of cynicism and necessity. That's why I thought it was such a good essay. I think it points out a whole lot of things. The roots for our problems really go back to the Iraq War, which, as an anti-war blogger, you were too. Those roots were important. We were right then. And the fallout we're seeing decades later, because what it did is weaken trust in government altogether to the point where it doesn't matter what you do, people still don't trust you. And we're seeing it now. We see it with, what's going on with COVID.
Yes.
And trying to convince people that, it's a reasonably good idea to get yourself vaccinated.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
And,
People who just say, I don't trust it because the government
I don't trust
says
you.
so.
I'm not putting that stuff in my body. I'm taking ivermectin.
Yeah, sure.
Because the government didn't tell me to do it. I read about it on the internet, and so I trust that a whole lot more than I trust you. So that goes back to the Iraq War and loss of trust.
I would.
And if you're old enough, it goes. Nixon's situation didn't really fade trust in government because it was government that helped catch him. And that Supreme Court 9-0 decision. And what do we get now? We get Clarence Thomas protecting his wife. I mean, it's all fading in terms of the trust in government. So those are the roots. And then Trump comes along, and the GOP realizes they're not particularly popular, but they're terrified of losing power. And Trump brings the energy of people who never voted before, who were willing to vote. And the reason they never voted before is they never thought that their racist movement could catch on. And Trump said, no, it can. And so by allying with the GOP becomes fascist adjacent.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well,
the old saying about what do you call somebody in 1944 Germany who just went along to get along?
Yes.
A Nazi.
Right. Now we can excuse them to call them Nazi adjacent. Probably shouldn't have invented
you
the
know,
term.
but that's where the GOP finds itself, and that's why Dan Fruitkin is writing what he's writing, and how come people aren't covering this? And he's absolutely right. Why aren't people covering this?
I don't know.
This is one guy writing on Substack, and I think, he pretty much nailed what's going on here.
No. Well, Substack I thought was where you went when your editor wouldn't allow you to publish the things you wanted to say.
So you want to sell
he was trying, so he went to. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what his background is or what he was trying to do. Maybe he comes from nowhere and just found Substack. And all right, well, I don't know how to find that out either. Now that I think about it.
Perhaps
he
writes something about it on Substack. Who knows?
Yeah, I guess I'll have to go read it. Okay, well, that is, I don't know. I feel like I feel like it is being covered. It's just, it's not your day-to-day framework for the working beat reporters' coverage, and that's the big problem.
Well, my problem isn't so much the beat reporters. It's the ones who declare themselves as pundits and get on TV. And, of course, they're editors.
The beat. Yeah, right, true. I guess you get to claim that title as well. And I guess, you might ask, what difference would it make? Or maybe they ask themselves, what difference would it make if we were reporting this? His fans don't watch our news. They watch their own source of news that tells them not to trust government, even if we tell you, for whatever reason, to trust it, or help you learn to trust it, or take over the government so that you do trust it. Well, we'll just have our own alternative media where we say it's still not trustworthy.
John Gantz doesn't have a lot of information about him in his Substack piece, but he does on Twitter say, working on a book about the early 90s, please subscribe to my Substack on Popular Front. So now I got the right guy here. Yeah, co-host of Unclear and Present Danger with Jamel Bowie.
Oh, well, okay. So that's something. But is he writing and being published elsewhere besides his Substack, or did he used to be? And that's an interesting question. All right, well, I don't know. I don't know why people aren't talking about it more. It's just, I guess we have discussed it. They have a template to work from, and it's easier to get past the editors if you hammer the fascist nonsense into the shape of, roughly the shape of traditional Republicans. And say, I don't know, they're supporting him and they're backing him, so they must. Who's more expert in whether or not traditional Republicans agree with Trump than traditional Republicans? And they say they do, so we must be on the right track, even if they don't. Now, if they spoke up, I suppose, I wonder, this is chicken and egg, would the mainstream media begin to cover it? Oh, geez, the traditional Republicans are abandoning him, elected Republicans abandoning him in droves. That might mean something, but I don't know. They're not driven to do it because it's to their advantage not to, so they won't. I don't know. Too much analysis to ask of the beat reporter, and pundits don't know either. I don't know. Too easy to say.
Pundits know they're and. I think, the point has been made. There's only 5 headlines to write, so this is one of them, so they don't do it.
Why reinvent the wheel? You can just use one of the old headlines. Huh.
Anyway, that's my roundup for today. I just thought it was interesting.
Sure, I did too. And this one is very long. And it was a little dense up at the top. I guess he's one of those writers that immediately lets you know, all right, there's going to be a lot of SAT words in this, so pay attention. But
I think I picked out the good points there.
I think so. All right. Well, thank you, Greg. And it being Thursday, we won't see you again until after the invasion of Ukraine over the weekend. So
yeah, probably not. So we'll be back on Monday, weather permitting.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
And we'll go from there. We're getting we got about 2 inches of snow, but it's on top of ice, and so the roads are kind of a mess.
That sounds bad.
And the thing about I don't know what Virginia is going to get in terms of weather. But, sometimes you look and say, well, why did they close the schools? Only because it rained. Well, I don't know. Ask your governor.
They didn't. Yeah, right.
He's responsible, apparently.
Right. Wait, what happened? He's taking personal charge. I thought you were going to protect our children from unnecessary school closures.
But I will say, from a New England perspective, the 1 or 2 inches of snow changing to rain and such, often worse road conditions than 6 inches of snow or 7 inches. When you get 6 or 7 inches of snow, you plow it, you clean it up, you're good. When you get 1 or 2 inches on top of rain or rain on top of that, and then temperatures around 32 degrees, that's when it's really bad.
Yeah.
So it sounds like it's not a lot of snow, but actually icy conditions make it worse driving than the 6 inches.
Yeah. It's also bad when the timing is wrong and it falls when people are already trying to get to work, as opposed to overnight when the roads are clear and the plows can just barrel through. It causes a lot of problems. And I think it was supposed to here turn over to snow a little earlier, and there was supposed to be some snowfall during morning commute on top of rain that would be freezing up, and it just didn't get cold enough to turn over to snow. But there's another storm on the way again. So
right, it's that one that I'm more worried about than this one.
Well, right. Remember to go and buy
when is that supposed to hit you?
Bread. You know what? It's not supposed to drop snow on us, but it is supposed to drop snow on the college campus that we're bound for this weekend. So that's a serious issue. And I think tomorrow.
Is it tomorrow?
I think so. And then we were going to go on Sunday, so we'll give them a chance to plow up. But we'll go and see is the Hampton Roads area of Virginia prepared to deal with what might be 8 inches of snow? Will they get it cleaned up by the next day, or will it paralyze them because they don't buy snow plows?
Oh,
I don't know.
So got to keep an eye on Hampton Roads. Always have to keep an eye on Hampton Roads.
It's a good idea. Okay.
All righty, take care, and I
you.
will talk to you on Monday.
All right, that seems like a great plan. If anybody asks for the paperwork on this plan, it is privileged, and we'll see you in court. Thanks, Greg.
8 out of 9 Supreme Court justices think you'll eventually have to turn it over.
That's probably true, but what do they think about sugarless gum for their clients who chew gum? I don't know. We'll check it out. Okay. Great, and music now happening, and can disguise your exit if you prefer to do things that way. We will continue to explore the question of what is Trumpism and why isn't anybody doing anything about it, given that we have Jewish space lasers, but I'm not certain why that's the case, but we can explore that in the coming hour. We'll be right back after this short break, much more to come. And again, thanks to you, Greg, and we'll see you on Monday. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see, finishing up a few bit of personal items and answering the texts from people who just need answers and don't know that I'm in the middle of a radio show. So, okay, I try to make them aware and get them what they need later on. All right, let's see if I can reset here. Head back to Pocket and to Twitter and discuss all the fun things that I had set aside and forgot about in the wake of discussion with Greg. Okay, let's see. First of all, I guess we owe you the update on Senate procedure from last night. You know the upshot of it. They weren't able to pull off the maneuver that they wanted to pull off in order to get the filibuster out of the way and move the voting rights legislation. And then we're not sure exactly what they plan to do next. They shook their fists and said this wasn't over, but then scheduled a judicial nomination for consideration, and so in effect it is in fact over. Not that they can't return to it later on. We did discuss at least the one small bore parliamentary maneuver in which Chuck Schumer changes his vote so that he can call it up for reconsideration later on, and they can take another crack at it. I guess the things to take away from it for people who watch the procedure closely. First of all, I think of some interest, though not a great deal, if you ask me, of some interest is that you didn't hear it in any of the language that Schumer used to try to set up the maneuver. And it wasn't until, it was literally, I don't think any real discussion of what was the thing they were trying to do exactly. We know they wanted to find a way around the filibuster. And there was a lot of talk during the week about, well, let's adopt a new rule that says that we have to have the talking filibuster, even though you don't need to adopt a new rule in order to have a talking filibuster. This is something we discussed a little bit last week and a little bit with Joan. The Rule 19 filibuster. When we talk about the filibuster, we're generally talking about changing rules or changing the interpretation of Rule 22. So what's with the 19 thing? Rule 22 is the current cloture rule. So if you're thinking of changing filibuster rules such that it becomes easier to invoke cloture, whether by simple majority vote or some number less than 60, or you want to tinker with how you count the votes when you're voting on cloture, Rule 22 is the place you need to make the change. We've heard Manchin say, well, maybe we should keep it the 60 3/5, that is, of the Senate, but change the way we count such that cloture can be invoked by 3/5 of those present and voting, as opposed to those duly chosen and sworn, so that if you don't show up for the debate and stick around for the debate, you could end up seeing cloture invoked by fewer than 60 votes, but then Manchin changed his position on this about 16 times. And it was never a terribly coherent position to begin with. He insists on the 60 vote threshold for a number of things. And then he said, well, maybe we move to present and voting for cloture as opposed to duly chosen and sworn. And that's where the 60 thing comes from. And then he tries to explain, well, the reason I want to save the filibuster is that I think it forces us to be bipartisan in our approaches. I mean, and it sort of does. It's just that you can't get it also means you can never get a bipartisan coalition to actually pass the thing. But it does force you to try to court the other side. It's just a fool's errand. So I don't know how worth it really is. But he keeps saying that it forces bipartisanship, even though we can't actually point to any instances of it working during his tenure in the Senate, and bipartisan compromises on substantive issues getting passed. But he keeps stressing that part of it. And of course, I mean, I don't know what it does to his thinking if you said, well, hypothetically, what would you think of for the sake of argument, a Republican majority of 60, where they have, 60 or 61 members of their conference, and they vote on party line basis, so that you find eventually that no, the filibuster doesn't force bipartisanship at all. In fact, they're able to pass these things on a partisan basis, which, might be okay because, well, they have an overwhelming majority in the Senate. And so long as you view the Senate and election to it as a legitimate exercise, which is questionable at this point, but if you take that as a given, then yeah, you ought to be able to pass your policy agenda. There's not that much we can do to object to that. But it doesn't mean that there's bipartisanship because you require 60 votes for something. Nor does it mean, I guess it can work the other way too. Like, okay, in a closely divided Senate, what's the point of requiring 60 votes in order to force bipartisanship? Why isn't 55 sufficient to force bipartisanship? It still requires votes from the other side in order to pass a bill. But why the reluctance to depart from 60? And do you even have a reluctance to depart from 60? You keep saying that you do, but then you talk about changing the way votes can be counted. And so, the reason he's doing that is so that he can't be pinned down to any real position, and you don't have to actually, there's no point in trying to bargain with him over anything, because he just changes his position in order to weasel out of agreeing with you. depending on what the circumstances are. Anyway, so if you wanted to change the number or the method of counting, but keep cloture as a supermajority exercise of some kind, or for that matter, if you wanted to change the threshold for cloture to a simple majority and just keep the cloture procedure. I don't know why you would, but let's say you do. Rule 22 is where you would do this work. Rule 19, as we mentioned, has been suggested in the past as an alternative to getting rid of the filibuster or changing cloture rules that might possibly bring Manchin and or Sinema on board because it wouldn't constitute a rule change. I don't know whether I archived the various pieces that we had put aside on it. I remember that, I think I probably did, that when Joan was with us on Tuesday, she was pointing to, I think one of the examples she had of it came from, was it from Reason? Is that where it wasn't? She was reminding us, I don't usually turn to Reason for anything, but they explained the Rule 19 filibuster fairly well. But I think we also had a piece on it from Bill Scher, who, like I had said, was can also be equally nettlesome. But yeah, let me take a look at my discussion with her because I think we had those traded there. Yeah, and it was Reason magazine. And I offered up the Washington Monthly piece from Bill Scher that makes the explanation. I thought maybe his version of a more coherent telling of it, because it's written, might help outline things. But I think everybody kind of understands the basics of it by now. He put it this way: Chuck Schumer's last chance on voting rights, the talking filibuster that even Manchin, until he actually had to vote on something, said he supported. And so, it might be a fool's errand here, too, to even explain the talking filibuster. But here's why you could get around, a way to get around the need for a cloture vote, however you count it, does exist in the rules. The talking filibuster is something the majority leader can produce, and it just might help democracy, says Bill. Back on the 14th, Democrats can't pass their voting rights bills without bending or breaking the filibuster, which Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says they will try to do by next week, and then they did try to do last night. Exactly how is not clear. According to Politico, Democrats are oscillating between voting on a talking filibuster or a carve-out for elections reform. Why are they torn? Some Democrats want to preserve significant sway for the minority and prefer a talking filibuster. That would still allow the minority to gum up the Senate for weeks, but senators would have to hold the floor to do so to stop a vote at a majority threshold. Others prefer the carve-out, which would allow a quicker majority vote, but pare back minority rights too much for some. This is an easy choice, he says, if you know two things. And we do, but do we know the right two things? Let's find out. One, Democrats don't have the votes to change the Senate's rules by majority vote. Senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema oppose such a parliamentary maneuver, or parliamentary hardball, as he says, with Sinema on Thursday forcefully declaring her support for keeping the 60-vote threshold to pass legislation. Two, Schumer can bring back the talking filibuster without any vote at all. As I explained last year, the era of the talking filibuster didn't end with a change in the Senate rule book. In 1970, I've lost my track on this because I'm once again being texted. I said, I'll talk to you after. And now the text is, well, when will after be? Well, later is the answer, but they're not listening to the radio show, so it's useless for me. Anyway, where were we with what he was saying? Sinema wants to keep the 60-vote threshold to pass legislation. And two, Schumer can bring back the talking filibuster without any vote at all. As I explained last year, he says, the era of the talking filibuster didn't end with a change in the Senate rule book. In 1970, out of frustration with talking filibusters chewing up floor time, then Senate Majority Leader Mike Mansfield, the Montana Democrat, began double-tracking the old two-track system, which we still use, asking for, that is, unanimous consent to shelve a filibustered bill and proceeding to different legislation. One of the big problems with, like, as we said, with the talking filibuster, you can do it. It's in the rules now. It just means that it's the only business pending before the Senate to the exclusion of all else. That's the way it would have to work. And that's the way it did work up until 1970, when Mansfield said, all right, well, instead of being able to why let filibustering senators block all legislation by filibustering one bill when you could simply invent a mechanism allowing them to block this one piece of legislation, but not necessarily everything else. Of course, in 20 years or so later, they realized, oh, well, actually it means we can block all legislation by simply declaring there to be a filibuster in place and not actually doing any of the talking. But how does it work? Double tracking. You ask for unanimous consent to say, well, let's put this other bill aside. We won't move on it. No action will take place on it. So the filibusterer, who has the right to freeze this thing in place, continues to enjoy that right. He just doesn't have to do any talking to do it. And in the meantime, we'll consider this other stuff. It was probably considered a brilliant innovation up until, the late 1990s and early 2000s, when people just worked around that and said, well, okay, fine. Well, you can shelve this thing and you guarantee that it won't move, so I'll give my unanimous consent to that. And then I'll just filibuster the next thing. And yes, you can ask unanimous consent to move that aside too, and it won't move anywhere. So I'm satisfied that the work of the filibuster is being done, even though I don't have to speak about it. And then whatever you bring up next, I will just do the same thing to that. And that's where we find ourselves now. So you could ask for unanimous consent to shelve a filibustered bill and proceed with different legislation. With one track for filibustered bills and one for bills getting floor time, there was no need to strain a senator's lungs or legs or feet or anything else to suffocate legislation. The era of the silent filibuster had begun. But if Schumer wants to make filibusterers talk, all he need do is forget about the second track and leave the contested bill on the floor. This happened in 1988, and then it didn't happen again, basically, because it really kind of sucks. But this happened in 1988. Like today, an election reform bill was at issue. The Democratic majority wanted to limit campaign spending. Republicans claimed that the bill advantaged incumbents, consigning them to permanent minority status. After the bill cleared the Senate Rules Committee in April of 1987, Democrats tried to invoke cloture to end floor debate and hold an up or down vote 7 times. Republicans repeatedly filibustered in an attempt at bipartisan negotiations. Failed in February of 1988, and the Senate Majority Leader, then West Virginia's Robert Byrd, got fed up. There is no point in having a nice, easygoing filibuster here, carrying on a slow filibuster in the back rooms, Byrd said on February 23rd during the formal debate before moving to a record 8th cloture vote. Let us have it out here on the floor. This is where it ought to be, where the American people can see it. The American people need to know what it's about, and they need to know who is keeping the Senate from coming to a vote on this. The filibuster lasted until February 26th. For a time, Republicans stalled by calling for a quorum, then denying a quorum by fleeing the Senate floor. Why does that work? If you have a quorum call and you try to prevent a quorum from being mustered, if no quorum can be produced, you have to adjourn your proceedings for the day. And that carries a lot of other significance as well. But it's also extra delay that you don't have to work at getting. You're adjourned. So yes, Democrats countered by voting to have the fugitive senators arrested by the U.S. Capitol Police and ordered back to the floor. Oregon Republican Senator Bob Packwood was captured and carried back feet first. And a small parenthetical note here that he adds: the procedural warfare did not sully the Senate's clubby nature. It didn't ruin the Senate, didn't turn it into the House or anything like that. Upon Packwood's return, Byrd praised him for the fine spirit in which he has accepted the inevitable, and he has shown the finest of examples by his smile, his good humor, and I want to thank him for helping the Senate to get a quorum. Packwood cheekily responded, "Might I say to my good friend, I did not come fully voluntarily. The sergeant-at-arms and all of his stout men surrounded my office. Let me simply say I am transferring the colors to another ship and shall fight on in some other fashion." Byrd's gambit did not work in the end. Unfazed, Republicans blocked cloture for the 8th and final time. So I guess I would question at this point whether or not they really tried to do the talking filibuster in 1988, because they kept trying to vote for cloture, which is not, not the talking filibuster as described in Rule 19. Anyway, he goes on to say, so don't get me wrong, I'm not arguing that the talking filibuster is going to fix all the Democrats' problems. I've shared my concerns about the potential unintended consequences of the talking filibuster, which are illustrated by the 1988 example, which is a terrible example. Just because you make the minority talk doesn't mean the minority will budge. And when the minority can clog the floor, no other Senate business can be accomplished. No legislation, no executive branch appointments, no judicial confirmations. But right now, what is on the Democrats' to-do list that's so pressing? Build Back Better is stuck. Biden has 26 pending judicial nominations, but they can wait until the end of the year, so long as no Democratic senator, say, dies from one of the 9 states where the replacement could be named by a Republican. What better time to have a knockdown drag-out? Of course, my other concern expressed the other day is the current continuing resolution under which the government is operating and or depends for its funding in order to operate expires on February 18th, I think, offhand, or somewhere thereabouts, somewhere in mid-February. And a Rule 19 talking filibuster, if they were really dedicated to it, could last past then, and you could have the CR expire while you're gumming up the works with the filibuster. Although, a more competent messaging machine, perhaps, you might have more confidence in someone else doing this other than the current Democratic messaging machine. But you could, if you were so inclined and capable, spin it as, the Republicans have been filibustering for a month now, literally talking around the clock, prohibiting any other business from being done. And not only are they doing this to block voting rights legislation, but they're also shutting down the government. So, maybe not a good time for this. But it also, these things tend to backfire on Democrats also, although government shutdowns do tend to backfire on Republicans pretty frequently, I must say. So it's something you could consider. At any rate, they're not considering it because they're moving to those judicial nominations that could wait. Drama on the floor, to continue with the article, could have a relatively happy ending for Democrats. No, they shouldn't expect 10 Republicans to embrace the Freedom to Vote Act. But according to Punchbowl News, a bipartisan group of senators, several of whom negotiated the recent infrastructure law, are discussing an election reform bill focused on measures that address the grave threat of election subversion, including updating how the Electoral College count is ratified. A filibuster, grinding Senate business to a halt, could pressure the group to finalize an agreement. Democrats could claim that their insistence on a talking filibuster prompted the Senate to act. Republicans could brag that their filibuster forced Democrats to give up some of the most prized proposals, such as requiring states to offer no-excuse mail-in voting, 2 weeks of early voting, and same-day voter registration. Not all Democrats would celebrate a compromise. Vice President Kamala Harris recently deemed a bill that only tightened up the Electoral College ratification process as not a solution to the problem at hand. But ending the floor fight with a bill that at least makes some progress beats ending it with no bill in another round of Democrats in disarray media coverage. On January 5th, Schumer wrote to his colleagues that we as Senate Democrats must urge the public in a variety of different ways to impress upon their senators the importance of acting and reforming the Senate rules if that becomes a prerequisite for action to save our democracy. allow me to impress upon Senator Schumer that he has the power to revive the talking filibuster and his best chance to save our democracy. So now I've arrived at the end, and it occurs to me that despite the setup of the article, it doesn't really tell you anything about what Rule 19 would require and how it would work. But we have covered it on the show in the past, and so I guess I'll just do it briefly in context, and maybe even read you. Have I read your Rule 19? We may have in the past. The relevant part of Rule 19 can be brought up pretty quickly. And remember, they do the rules in Roman numerals there. So if you're looking around for it, or you want to Google it up for yourself, you're looking for Rule XIX rather than Rule 19. It might work to give them 19 in Roman or in Arabic numerals and see what happens. Relevant part is right up top in Section 1. There's other stuff, and Rule 19 was bandied about yesterday because Rule 19 also has to do with decorum in debate, and you're not supposed to disparage other senators or their states. And people did do that, and then were losing their temper, and you can use Rule 19 to enforce that prohibition. But that's in Section 2. In Section 1, when a senator desires to speak, he shall rise and address the presiding officer and shall not proceed until he is recognized. You see that every time, no matter what's going on. And the presiding officer shall recognize the senator who shall first address him. No senator shall interrupt another senator in debate without his consent. And to obtain such consent, he shall first address the presiding officer. And no senator shall speak, this is the important part, and no senator shall speak more than twice upon any one question in debate on the same legislative day without leave of the Senate, which shall be determined without debate. So, what does it mean? It's a little fancy, but you get the part about no senator shall speak more than twice upon any one question in debate on the same legislative day. So, okay, technically, we know what? That if you don't formally adjourn the Senate's proceedings at the end of the day, but rather simply recess until some time certain, you can have the same effect. You want senators to be able to go home and take a rest? Go ahead. We will recess and reconvene at 10 a.m. tomorrow. And it's not an adjournment. Adjournment, which is the usual way of finishing up business, and why wouldn't, under normal circumstances, you would just say, fine, we'll adjourn until 10 a.m. tomorrow. Why recess? Because when you adjourn, that flips the calendar page, the legislative day calendar. So if you recess instead of adjourn between tonight's proceedings and tomorrow's, although the calendar says it's the next day, Friday, the legislative calendar says it's the same legislative day, still Thursday, January 20th, if I recess tonight instead of adjourning. Dumb, but there it is. It wasn't designed, I don't think, with this sort of thing in mind, but it's there and it's a rule and you can use it. So if we adjourn, instead it's the same legislative day. Remember what that means. That means that if Senator Ted Cruz has already spoken twice on this subject under debate, the question in debate, then if he rises to make another comment, someone, me, I can say, I object. And I can tell Mr. President, I object to the recognition of the senator from Texas. We are operating under Rule 19. It's the case, unfortunately for him, it's the case that he has, in fact, spoken already twice upon this one question in debate on the same legislative day, and he shouldn't be recognized for these purposes. And if all is going well and people rule correctly, then the answer would be, yeah, sorry, Ted Cruz, you can't talk again. So, with that in mind, of course, senators won't just absentmindedly ask for recognition to speak and speak for a few minutes at a time. They'll know that if they're trying to block legislation and having a talking filibuster, that every time they rise, they should expect to be on their feet for hours and hours. So, the refusal to adjourn at the end of the day will keep you on the same legislative day. What about the one question in debate. That's why you can't move on to other stuff, right? That's why a filibuster blocks all other material, all other legislation, nominations, etc., that the Senate might be covering. You got to stay on the same question in order to rack those two speaking incidences up. And all it takes is sitting there with a piece of paper with all the senators' names on it and write a check mark next to their name every time that they rise to speak, and then be there or have somebody else there ready to rise to object if they choose to try and give a third speech. Again, it's a matter of how long can the senators go and how many of them are truly dedicated to giving those long speeches. You might find that they aren't all ready to do that.
Hi everyone, it's me, Gil. Minimal contributor to content, but regular contributor to funding for Kagro in the morning. Let's change things up from David's so very tired plea for your contributions with a plea of my own. If you want to add your voice to the show, do it. Record your own segment using your favorite recording device and send it to David. Read an article and give your opinion. Write your own essay and read that. The sky's the limit. Well, not really. Try to keep it relatively short so David doesn't have to stress about cutting it and hurting your feelings. Join the hallowed ranks of Greg Dworkin and Joan McCarter and be part of this somewhat witty deep dive into political topics with unnecessary censoring. Lend your voice to the show by sending it to kagrox@gmail.com. KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let's see. All right, so there's still a little bit more, of course, to explain in the Rule 19 scenario, and then a description of why it even, encompassed. I don't know why actually they used Rule 19 or mentioned Rule 19 last night. I have some speculation on that, but at any rate, if you're trying to operate a talking filibuster under Rule 19, you get the idea. You can only speak twice. And we've done the math before. If you are able to stay on your feet for, and I guess you got to try and give some guesstimate of, we've seen people able to occupy the floor and stay on their feet sometimes for like 20 plus hours. And when people put on a stunt filibuster, as we've seen, Rand Paul's done it, Bernie Sanders has done it, others have done it as well. They tend to go in the high teens, maybe just under 20 hours, 15 hours or so. And they didn't look like they were about to drop dead from it. They could probably do it again, especially if there were a couple of calendar days in between the requirements that they hold the floor. But if every we've gone through the math, right? If every Republican senator is dedicated to doing it, and it's not clear that every Republican senator will give 2 15-hour plus speeches on blocking voting rights, there are probably some senators that say, I'll vote with you, but I don't really want to be out there seen doing this. So, no, I'm not gonna, and somebody else is gonna have to take my shift. But if they were able to do it, they would be able to occupy the floor, and you'd have to, if you kept the Senate running 24/7, and you would want to do that because anytime any one of them stops speaking, unless there's another of them on the floor at the moment and prepared to speak and hold the floor in their place, then you could simply put the question, right? The whole idea of the Rule 19 talking filibuster is when somebody finally crashes and they can't speak anymore, or they've used up, or everybody has used up their 2 speeches, right? At that point, it's legit for the chair to say, well, who else seeks recognition? And if nobody's there to say, I do, then they say, well, no senators desiring to speak on the current issue, I put the question. The question is on passage of the bill. And at that point, how many votes does it take to pass a bill? The answer is whatever a simple majority is, whatever a simple majority of those present and voting is. So if you've put the question, there's no need for 60 votes on anything because there's no need for cloture. The proper use of Rule 19 involves, if not no calls for cloture votes, at least at the end, it involves simply moving the question of passage of the bill as opposed to cloture, because you don't need to end debate. Debate just ended unless somebody else shows up. Or, of course, the other problem is that you can, if you are on your last legs, literally, say, well, I suggest the absence of a quorum, and have a nice, long, slow quorum call, and that will give you the chance to run around and find some other senator to speak. But eventually, if you keep it the same legislative day for long enough by refusing to adjourn, it doesn't really matter how long people go. Eventually, every senator willing to filibuster will have used up their 2 allotted speeches on the question at hand on the same legislative day, and you can call all the quorum calls you want. It won't really do much to move things along. You can have, and then the majority leader can use their preferential recognition to come to the floor, and if you want, you could produce a live quorum call that will settle the question once and for all and actually establish a quorum, and then move that a vote be taken. Or you can just seek to be recognized and say, no other senators being eligible to speak and no other senators desiring to speak, I call the question. I move that the question be put to the body, and we decide. It's a way around asking for a cloture vote. It's a way of rendering cloture unnecessary. So that's why I question, for instance, Bill Scher's use of the 1988 example. They kept going back and asking for a cloture vote. So I'm not clear that is an example of a Rule 19 talking filibuster. It's a filibuster where there was a lot of talking, but I don't think it's what what anybody would be interested in by means of when they describe using a talking filibuster to get around the need for cloture. So anyway, I'm not certain that that's a good example of it, and it can be very taxing, and you will only want to use it very sparingly because you can chew up, 40, 50 calendar days on this stuff during which no other business can be transacted. So what are some of the things that would make it, you might say, who cares that we lose 50 days of floor time in the Senate, cavalierly, or you might say, there really is literally nothing else going on at the moment. So we finished all the judicial nominations, let's say. Well, like I said, there's one thing looming out there is the expiration of the current continuing resolution. That could concern you. Or you might decide it's politically advantageous to, you're sure you can sell the ill effects of a government shutdown as Republicans' fault. We would absolutely pass a new CR or pass all of our appropriations bills, regular appropriations bills, but for the fact that we're stuck on voting rights, and we're only stuck on voting rights because they won't shut up. Maybe that'll work for you, maybe not. Of course, another issue might be, while we were doing this thing, the Russians invaded Ukraine after all, and the Senate was unavailable to deal with it. Now, what might they need to do? I don't know, approve emergency transfers of weaponry or funding of some kind, et cetera, et cetera. What if your Senate is unavailable to do something like that and it's something that's required? I mean, I think you could probably handle it with executive action at this point, so maybe that's okay. Could be anything else, though. Any number of things could happen, circumstances arise, or could be created by somebody who wants to either divert you from that, exhausting all speakers on the current issue by resetting the day or resetting the agenda and moving on to a different question, or it could be just somebody who, it could be a legitimate question about something else, or it could be somebody who wants to blame you for inaction on other things. So there's a lot of political situations in which it could become uncomfortable to stay on the one question. It's just, you got to pick the right time. So, yeah, I don't know. If you are worried about getting around to a cloture vote or holding more cloture votes or holding 8 cloture votes or holding 2 like we held yesterday, then you're not doing a Rule 19 filibuster. And, some suggestions, I think we read the other day, suggestions about how we might improve the Rule 19 filibuster by making it more difficult or at least less automatic that you can get a quorum call at any time in order to use it as a delaying tactic. We want to maybe modify how available that tactic is. Anyway, despite it all, last night, for whatever reason, there was mention in the proceedings of Rule 19. I just don't really see what they were getting at with this. I noticed, for instance, although Chuck Schumer made no mention of Rule 19 in making his motion, and I guess here I want to go over to C-SPAN and find their transcript of what happened last night. I don't know if it's as easily available this morning as it was last night, but let's see. And it was like the featured video yesterday for the Senate, and now I guess they've moved on to other things. But I should have taken the screen grab of the transcript of the motion. It was confusing sounding, and it would have been funny, basically, to read the motion that Schumer actually made. But okay, in the absence of that, the reason Rule 19 comes up is that the Senate Cloakroom Twitter account was tweeting the status of the question and the voting that was going on last night, saying that they were at 10:21 last night, tweeting, "Now voting. Shall the decision of the chair stand as the judgment of the Senate in relation to Rule 19 and the legislative filibuster?" And I wondered, why Rule 19? It doesn't make any sense to invoke. At this point, they were really, I would have thought, the way the thing's set up, because they were looking for a cloture vote, they were looking to change interpretations of Rule 22, which includes cloture. But what was going on? My best guess is perhaps set up by reading the roll call article on last night's proceedings, which sort of gets right up to the line of maybe offering an explanation and then turns away because no one wants to explain these things. Democrats tie talking filibuster gambit to Senate's two-speech rule. That's the headline. Proposed change lacks support of full caucus. Except, what change are you talking about? If you are trying to use the talking filibuster and the two-speech rule, there doesn't have to be a proposed change, and you don't need the support of the full caucus to do it. Niels Lesniewski is the reporter for this one for Roll Call. Senate Majority Leader Charles E. Schumer plans to try to implement a talking filibuster. This is from the 18th, so that was, Tuesday, talking about what was supposed to go on Wednesday. Plans to try to implement a talking filibuster rule. You don't need to. That would allow the chamber's voting rights debate to be brought to a close by just a simple majority once Republicans have run out of turns to speak. Except you don't need a majority to bring debate to a close under a talking filibuster. When people run out of opportunities to speak and no one else seeks recognition, as Democrats presumably would not try to do, because why would you continue the filibuster? If all the Republicans now have used their two speeches and are currently ineligible to speak again, you don't need to do anything to close debate. There doesn't have to be a vote of any kind, whether by simple majority or 60-vote threshold or any other kind. The chair simply says, well, no other senators desiring to speak, the question is on passage. Debate is over. You're now moved on to voting. No votes on ending debate. But the New York Democrats' proposal announced Tuesday evening lacked buy-in from the entire caucus, Manchin and Sinema, meaning its implementation will likely be blocked as early as Wednesday, though we waited to see it blocked. I guess it did happen before midnight on Wednesday. Once members of the minority party have exhausted all of their speaking rights and defended their position on the Senate floor, the debate will have run its course, and the Senate will move to vote on final passage at a majority threshold, Schumer told reporters late Tuesday. That's true. That's the correct interpretation of Rule 19. But then that didn't happen for some reason last night. He described the proposal, which would come up for a floor vote after the GOP rejects the majority leader's motion to invoke cloture on a voting rights measure, as being restorative of a long-standing Senate rule known colloquially as the two-speech rule. And now we're off the rails again, right? He describes his proposal, which is not a proposal, it's just Rule 19. But I propose we use Rule 19. That can be a proposal, which would come up for a floor vote. No, it wouldn't come up for a floor vote, either after the GOP rejects the majority leader's motion to invoke cloture or ever. There's no vote on it. It wouldn't be necessary. I don't really understand why that, comes up at all. But it would come up for a floor vote after the GOP rejects the majority leader's motion to invoke cloture. Now, you might say, all right, well, I'm going to move to invoke cloture. And if they won't do it, then I will say, all right, we're going to starting now, I'm counting everybody's speeches. We're going to stay on this legislative day and this legislative question. We're going to keep tabs on everybody. That's fine. You might try to invoke cloture first, because why not? Maybe you'll get it. But, yeah, the idea of it coming to a vote, I just don't understand why they put it that way. Under the provisions of Rule 19, Niels goes on to say, and they quote, "No senator shall speak more than twice upon any one question in debate on the same legislative day without leave of the Senate, which shall be determined without debate." Okay. Oh, and I guess there at that point, that's interesting. Like the one part I didn't work out is without leave of the Senate. Does that mean unanimous consent? Or does this next phrase, which shall be determined without debate, mean that the Senate would vote on whether or not to allow a third speech for some reason? That could be it, but presumably the majority, even if they don't have 60 among them, would vote no on allowing a third speech by a filibustering senator. Anyway, legislative days, of course, they go on to explain, conclude when the Senate formally adjourns at the end of a session day, but they do not end if the Senate merely recesses overnight, so the two-speech limit can technically extend indefinitely. And there is an argument to be made that no change in rules or precedents is needed to get to a simple majority vote through strict enforcement of Rule 19. James Wallner, a legislative procedure expert now at the R Street Institute, made that argument in 2017, saying Republicans could have used the rule to get a confirmation vote for President Donald Trump's Supreme Court nominee, Gorsuch, without changing the Senate precedents. Doing so simply requires the Senate to remain in the same legislative day until the filibustering members have exhausted their ability to speak on the nominee in question, Wallner wrote in a Heritage Foundation report. If Democrats were to invoke the two-speech rule without changing the rules to make it easier to use, there is no shortage of ways the Republicans could seek to extend the debate through procedural motions and efforts to debate them. Schumer's remarks indicate the Democrats intend to try and set a new precedent to speed that process along. Virginia Senator Tim Kaine was among the Democrats to speak alongside Schumer following a Tuesday evening caucus meeting. He said it was an important opportunity for senators to make their positions known. This, by the way, was the same press conference, I believe, at which Amy Klobuchar gave, by what was by most accounts an excellent answer to a question about the whole situation, voting rights and the need to be rid of the filibuster, etc. And she's getting deserved praise for her answer via Twitter, where they're circulating the video. I mean, it was pretty good. I wasn't as impressed as some others, I guess, but it was a good answer. But I like good answers, and that's good. And I guess we're supposed to be impressed when somebody who's in the greatest deliberative body in the world gives a good answer in debate. Anyway, so what? Tim Kaine talks about it, and he says, important opportunity for senators to make their positions known. We all get to decide the kind of senator we want to be. That's a throwaway line. Ahead of the meeting, Joe Manchin reiterated his support for a more expansive actual debate on the Senate floor, but said again he was against a talking filibuster provision that would eliminate the 60-vote requirement to limit debate, which again is just more nonsense. A talking filibuster doesn't require a vote of any kind to end debate. It simply waits for debate to finish and for everybody to exhaust their ability to speak again. There's no vote, and so therefore it can't have a 60-vote requirement. He's just talking about two incompatible things, right? I like to have bologna in my peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Not only is that disgusting, but you're talking about a peanut butter and jelly and bologna sandwich. A peanut butter and jelly sandwich has 2 ingredients and 2 ingredients only. I guess bread doesn't count as an ingredient. It's just the brackets for the real ingredient. I don't know. Bread gets shortchanged in this. 3 ingredients. Okay, fine. But if you change it, then you're talking about a different thing. You should just understand that. But Joe Manchin is not particularly good at making that distinction, and he doesn't want to, and he knows that hardly anybody else is able to make that distinction. So if you say that, 60 votes, that's a thing that senators say when they talk about ending debate on stuff. So he's within the realm of reason. He kind of, sort of sounds like he knows what he's talking about. I don't know. It's nonsense to anybody who understands what's going on. You're for a talking filibuster, but having a vote at the end, well, what's the point of the talking? But anyway, so then he goes on to say, let's see. So he's against a talking filibuster provision that would eliminate the current 60-vote requirement to limit debate. I mean, you could come up with a thing that says, well, okay, from now on, if you're having a talking filibuster, if at some point during the talking filibuster somebody moves for cloture after, I don't know, if you want to do something, after the 100th hour of continuous session, then at that point cloture can be had by 55 votes. I mean, you would have to, either adopt that as a rule or manufacture a way to adopt that as a precedent by majority vote through the nuclear option. I mean, you could do that, but that's not what's on the books now. And he keeps saying we just use what's on the books now. A talking filibuster that would eliminate the 60-vote requirement. It does eliminate the 60-vote requirement. I read your Rule 19. There's no vote requirement at all in there. That was the whole thing with regard to holding the floor. There's no vote requirement whatsoever. And then he goes on anyway to say, he argued that it would give one party too much power if it controlled the White House and both chambers of Congress, which they actually kind of do. The only thing we have is the filibuster, he said. Whatever that means. Manchin, speaking ahead of the Democratic caucus meeting Tuesday, said he was not concerned about the possibility of a primary challenge as a result of his opposition to eliminating the 60-vote threshold to limit debate. I've never run in an election that I wasn't primaried, he said. This is West Virginia. It's rough and tumble, so bring it on. So, okay, he says he's not afraid of that. But he also says, I don't know what I'm talking about when I say I'm for a talking filibuster, or I'm against a talking filibuster without the 60-vote threshold. I mean, he's essentially saying, maybe this is useful. He's essentially saying he wants to change the rules. He wants Rule 19 to include Rule 22's 3/5 requirement. Why? Why should it? The whole point of Rule 19 is you have a debate, and what's the point really, honestly, of saying that you oppose the idea of if everybody in the Senate literally gets to say whatever they want for however long they want, twice, but then after that, there's no more debating to be done. What's the point of saying, well, I don't think we have at that point sufficiently debated the question. I think we should decide as a body whether or not we want to have more debate. And unless you get 60 votes to say, no, you don't want more debate, then we have more debate. Why? There would be no point of it. Obviously, you've had every chance, 2 chances to say anything you could possibly think of, including reading the phone book if you want to. More debate after that. You ran out of things to say so early in your speech that you then literally read the phone book until you collapsed. What would be the point of more debate? You had every opportunity. Then we gave you a second chance at it, and you still read the phone book. So anyway, I don't know. It's nonsense. And yet, when the Senate cloakroom framed the motion that Schumer made, and Schumer made no mention of Rule 19. He actually just said, he made this compound motion saying, and this is the only way I can connect it to Rule 19. So, and I guess this must be what the Senate cloakroom is talking about. At the end of his remarks, Schumer called for the cloture vote to come up, and he said, but first, I move that the Senate now vote on the question of the House amendment. Remember the whole convoluted procedure of using a shell bill so that you could bring it immediately to the floor. Right? The House or Senate had passed the bill, and they struck out all the text in it and replaced it with this new text, and the House had passed that. And so, therefore, it was a message from the House as opposed to a new bill, which means you don't have to have a motion to proceed, which means there won't be a filibuster on both the motion to proceed and then a filibuster to block the vote on passage. You can move straight to debate, and then if you can get cloture, then you can have your vote on passage. He was moving for cloture, and then he made a compound motion saying that the Senate should decide on this question, that there should be no other intervening questions, and that all amendments be ruled out of order, and parliamentary inquiries and various other questions also be ruled out of order, that this be the only question pending before the Senate, which was, I guess, the only reason I can see for the cloakroom framing this as a Rule 19 question is that in Rule 19, remember, it says that I guess the part I didn't read about Section 1. Section 1 being the one that no senator shall speak more than twice upon any one question in the same legislative day without leave of the Senate. Part B of this, at the conclusion of the morning hour at the beginning of a new legislative day, or after the unfinished business or any pending business has first been laid before the Senate on any calendar day, and until after the duration of 3 hours of actual session after such business is laid down, except as determined to be the contrary by unanimous consent or on motion without debate, all set up for this. All debate shall be germane and confined to the specific question then pending before the Senate. Remember that one part that I had read you before about this? No senator shall speak more than twice on one question in debate. He makes a motion to say, let's lock this question in as the only question. This current consideration of the House amendment to the Senate amendment to the House amendment to the Senate bill, right? That's the only question, and there can't be any others introduced. I want that as a ruling so that we can then say all debate has expired on this thing. And we will, or now we can start counting speeches if we decide to go ahead. Well, unfortunately, that's a compound motion and out of order. And he asks for it, and Pat Leahy is in the chair and says, well, no, actually, that's a compound motion and out of order. And Schumer chooses to appeal that ruling and say, well, I want that ruling to be up for debate now anyway, or up for a vote now anyhow, despite the fact that the rules forbid it. And so they set themselves up once again. They could invoke the nuclear option here by overruling the ruling of the chair. But in order to do that, you need a majority vote, and they didn't have the votes of Sinema and Manchin to do it. What does all this mean? It means that the time we spent in earlier shows saying that if you really wanted to do it and you wanted to give the senators a way to vote for it but have a one-off, I said the thing to do is to have the person in the chair rule contrary to the advice of the parliamentarian and simply lay out the rule as you want it to be, and let the Republicans, Mitch McConnell and others, object to the ruling, and then you move to table their motion to appeal the ruling, right? So you want Leahy to say, I'm lying, but I'm saying that the rule is thus and such. Whatever it is that Schumer wanted, I now declare that motion to be correct, and that to be the rule or the precedent that we set here on in. And then McConnell says, but that's baloney. That's not what the rules say. I appeal the ruling of the chair, which would set up a vote that you would need to muster a majority for to save that ruling. But why do that? Why not just move to table the appeal of the ruling of the chair? And if you can table it, then the only thing still standing is the ruling from the chair. We say that gobbledygook is the actual rule, even though it isn't. But the appeal was made, but we disposed of the appeal. Without the appeal, the ruling stands. In order to do that you might be able to get Manchin and Sinema to say, all right, that's so convoluted that just like the carve-out for the debt ceiling, I'll actually vote for it. That might work, but they wouldn't do that. And I thought that they wouldn't do that because the problem with Democrats, and particularly somebody like Pat Leahy, is I'm not going to sit there, they say, I'm not going to sit there in the chair and be told by the parliamentarian that that's not the rule, but then say it is the rule. I'm not going to lie. I won't do it. They couldn't find a Democrat who was willing to sit in the chair and do that, I guess, or they didn't want to disappoint Leahy as the dean of the Senate and let him do it. I don't know, but they had other tools at their disposal they chose not to use. Why?
Netrootsradio.com.
They don't really want to do it, maybe? People love to accuse them of
Listening
that.
to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
All right, there's no other explanation for it. Maybe they want to engage in a actual Rule 19 talking filibuster now going forward. I don't know. We'll find out, but it doesn't look like it according to their schedule. Anyway, we'll be back tomorrow if you want to talk about it some more or if you're exhausted about it. Justice Putnam out on another sick leave day, though. We'll be back to see you tomorrow.